So first off, the first thing I'll have to say about using the system compared to a normal traditional system is it's got a very wide dispersion. It goes 180 degrees, especially the Model 2, in either direction, right across the front. And the Model 1 I think is 160, but it's still very wide. So if you're using two systems in stereo, which I think most people will probably be doing if you want to use it for a front of house, it does work very well, but here's the but. You got to make sure, especially in where the vocals are going to be used, you got to make sure to route the vocals, pan them left or right. Never run them mono in the center, especially if the systems are closer than 20 feet apart. You end up with some phase cancellation, and essentially, even though you might have two there, it's going to be just as loud as only one, or it may actually be quieter than even just one system with a good clean vocal sound. So now you don't necessarily have to pan them hard left and hard right for the vocals, just say you had two different singers, but you may want to do that. So imagine I have a band. We got 3 vocalists, 2 guitars, bass, kick, and a drum kit. What I would end up doing is, with 3 vocalists, I'd pan one left, one right, and keep one mostly in the center. I may pan them a little bit left or a little bit right. And then the other one, with the guitars, I would go ahead and pan one guitar to each side. And then with the drums, I would probably take a couple, if I was going to use overheads, I'd probably pan one left, one right. And I would probably take the snare drum and pan that a little bit to the opposite side where the vocal was in. So I had one vocal, one left, one right, and then I had the one vocal just partially to the right, we'll say. So I'd take the snare and go partially to the left. The kick and the bass would remain in the center. You don't want to pan those. Any of the bass signals, those can stay mono right in the middle. But if you will, just think about what I've done here. I'm creating 2 completely different sound sources. The one L1 has a different sound than the other L1. And that's what you really want to do in a live setting. When you're running these as front of house, as the sound guy, you want them to have their own sound, distinct sound. You don't want to have them be, especially if you have them close, have them be the same, and that's where you'll run into issues. And a lot of times when I've used these, they have been, even just 12 feet apart, very close, and especially with the music in the park. So that gives you some flexibility in using 2, but at the same time there's some rules you need to remember. The other thing I can give you for a piece of advice or knowledge would be when you're using the L1 system in a live situation for front of house, probably this would even go for if you're using them behind you as a musician. You want to pull a lot of the bass out of the vocals. I think it depends on what microphone you're using, but what I've experienced is what it does is it muddies up the sound coming out of the L1. The little bass bins, whether you have the B1 or the B2, they go all the way up to 180 hertz, as far as I know, and that's pretty high for a woofer, for like a subwoofer. And like, to give you some example, most other subwoofers are crossed over at about 100 hertz, or right around 80. So 180, that's way up there. So what that does is it actually allows for some of the mid-bass frequencies to get down into the sub, but it also allows for the vocals to get kind of muddy sometimes. So what you got to do, and depending again on your microphone and on the voice you're working with, is pull out a lot of that low end out of the voice. If you do that, you'll just notice right away you're getting more volume out of the voice and it's more clear. Okay, so that's very important, and like I said, it'll vary depending on who you're working with vocally and who you or what kind of microphone you're using as well. But just remember, if it doesn't sound good, it sounds muddy, just keep pulling out more low end out of the voice. Set your high pass filter higher and higher until it sounds good. Trust your ear. I mean, there was a couple singers that I had, and they had such a muddy voice in that range, and I ended up having the high pass filter, I think, set at, it's like 350, and then even with a low EQ scoop out of the voice, that doesn't even seem like it's right. It's way too high for a high pass filter, but it worked, and that's what it took to get that vocal sounding okay. And that's pretty rare. Usually you have it set around 150 or 2, but that's still higher than most low pass filters you're going to have in line for most PAs for front of house. The next thing I'd like to bring up is, if you use it for front of house, if possible, if you've got long enough cables, run your bass bins, whether they be the B2 or the B1s, in the center. So if you got, like, say, a 15 or 20 foot stage, bring your L1s out to the outside of the stage, outer sides, and then put your B1 or your B1s or B2s in the center. And the reason for this is you'll actually get some phase cancellation going on with the low end, and you'll lose some of your bass frequencies. If you put them all in the center, you're going to have a nice, deep, hard-hitting sound. So that is my little video on how to use the L1 system as a front-of-house system, and just some tips that might help you out. Of course, you gotta use your ear and your mind more than anything else I can tell you or anyone else can tell you. On the gig, you got to think about what you're hearing and kind of your settings, so forth and so on, and play with it until it works right. But in general, those are some things that I found that really helped get the sound where I needed it to be.